What can you get out of eating a bunch of grapes? According to Steinbeck's novel Grapes of Wrath, diarrhea and a lot of life lessons. Grapes of Wrath has been touted as the classic of American classics by generations of literary critics. Its author, John Steinbeck, wrote the book in 1939 to chronicle the problems faced by migrant workers hunting for jobs around the United States. This increase in migrants was caused by the Great Depression, a severe worldwide economic depression of the 1930s. Oklahoma, the home of the novel's protagonist, was hit especially hard because of two concurrent events that occurred along with the Great Depression. The Dust Bowl, where overworked soil turned infertile and ruined the livelihoods of farmers, and the opening of the East Texas oil field, which dropped petroleum prices and destroyed Oklahoma's petroleum industry. As a result, over 15% of the Oklahoman population migrated to California to find a job, which is the storyline portrayed within the Grapes of Wrath. The novel begins with a young man named Tom Joad being released from prison on parole after 4 years of imprisonment for a murder charge. As he hitchhikes his way to his Oklahoma farmhouse, he stumbles upon a preacher from his childhood, Reverend Casey. When they reach Tom's home, it's abandoned, but Tom finds out that his family is at his Uncle John's place nearby. When he and Casey head over, they find that the family is packing up and leaving, as their farm's low turnover caused the bank to foreclose their home. The entire family loads up into a jalopy caravan and heads to California because they've seen in advertisements that it's a prosperous place with hundreds of jobs. Along the way, they lose several members of their clan. Both grandparents die, Casey gets arrested for no reason, and Noah and Connie abandon the group. In California, the Joads find that migrant workers are exploited and paid low wages. The novel follows the Joads' adventure around California as they take jobs wherever they can find them, for example picking peaches at 5 cents per box, and even live in a government camp for a bit. Casey is seen once near the end of the novel as a labor union organizer, and is beaten fatally by a police officer who calls him a communist. The story ends with Tom killing the police officer who beat Casey, the family fleeing to a different area, and Rosa Sharn having a stillborn baby, which allows her to offer breast milk to a starving man. Steinbeck worked long and hard to make this novel as accurate as possible, incorporating some of the information he learned from a man named Tom Collins. Collins was a government worker who was perfect for the job of being Steinbeck's informant. He even called himself a migrant liaison. Having worked at several government welfare camps, Collins dealt with displaced migrant affairs and wrote government reports regarding the conditions of these camps. Steinbeck would visit many of the camps while writing Grapes of Wrath and include many of the elements from Collins' reports, such as the way in which migrants spoke and even some small anecdotes, such as the fact that they'd be startled by toilet flushes from fancy toilets that they'd never seen before. Additionally, Steinbeck's inclusion of intercalary chapters within Grapes of Wrath was also effective in conveying the plight of migrants from Oklahoma. All odd-numbered chapters, rather than continuing with the story of the Joads, zoomed out on migrant workers as a whole and explored various issues. For example, one chapter discusses banks foreclosing farmhouses because they weren't turning a profit and their owners were defaulting on loans. Some of the owner men were kind because they hated what they had to do, and some were angry because they hated to be cruel, and some were cold because they had long ago found that one could not be an owner unless they were cold. Not only do these intercalary chapters make the book more interesting by changing the pace and tone, they are poetic in nature, with euphonious diction, and have a sermon-like quality. Steinbeck himself once commented on his choice to include these inner chapters, stating, "The basic purpose is to hit the reader below the belt. With the rhythms and symbols of poetry one can get to a reader, open him up, and while he is open, introduce things on an intellectual level which he would not or could not receive unless he was opened up." These inner chapters allow readers to see the crisis as a bigger picture, as something systemic, rather than as an issue that only affects the Joads and their small rural town. All in all, the story of the Joads and the punch of the inner chapters resonated with the American public immediately. The novel became highly controversial and widely discussed as Americans became aware of the injustices within their nation. However, it was not well received by large farming companies and various cities in California. Officials of Kern County, which was one of the places in which the Joads stopped to try to find work, believed that Steinbeck was undermining their efforts to provide aid to migrants. They stated that the book was libel and lies and voted to ban it in August of 1939. Another loud, disapproving voice was that of Bill Camp, an influential business magnate who headed the Farmers Association of California, arguably the most powerful agricultural alliance in all of America. Having connections in the Senate and the agricultural industry, Camp was an influential player in 1930s America. In Rick Wartzman's book, Obsede of the Extreme, which is about the banning and burning of Grapes of Wrath, Camp's efforts to publicly denounce the novel are described. Camp would call on his associates, who, funnily enough, hadn't even read the book, to hold public book burnings of the novel because when you don't want your darkest secret to get out, the best thing to do is tell everyone. But Grapes of Wrath is so much more than a Great Depression dose of realism. It's a true classic. It explores the effects of capitalism on society, the importance of love and camaraderie, and the fight to maintain one's dignity. In a techno-capitalist society such as the modern Western world, where everything is commodified and it's every man for himself, Steinbeck's scathing commentary on capitalism in the form of Grapes of Wrath rings true even today. Though Steinbeck talks of progress, for example, men of science developing technologies to increase crop yields and profits, one of the main themes running throughout the novel is that in a capitalist society, scientific and technological progress is used by the rich to further alienate the poor and increase the wealth gap between these two groups. This becomes evident when Steinbeck writes,
Men who can graft the trees and make the seed fertile and big can find no way to let the hungry people eat their produce. Men who have created new fruits in the world cannot create a system whereby their fruits can be eaten, and this failure hangs over the state like a great sorrow.
The closest migrant workers and small farmers come to accessing new science and technology and its fruits is when they are forced to use it by larger farmers and banks to turn a larger profit. Steinbeck also addresses the intense commodification of 1930s America and the ideology that nothing can be given away for free.
The works of the roots of the vines of the trees must be destroyed to keep with the price, and this is the saddest, bitterest thing of all. Cartloads of oranges dumped on the ground. The people came for miles to take the fruit, but this could not be. Men with hoses squirt kerosene on the oranges.
That brings us to our segment called Spot the Plot, where we discuss real-world contemporary events that reflect the themes and plot lines of novels. Today we're taking a closer look at Monsanto Company, an American multinational agricultural biotechnology corporation that is most widely known for producing GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Throughout the years, it has garnered a bad public reputation because it exploits migrant workers, for example, undocumented Mexican immigrants in the United States, as well as farmers in third world countries.
Monsanto has developed special types of seeds called terminator seeds, which die and become infertile after one growing season. This handy feature prevents plants from pollinating and giving rise to a new generation, which forces poor farmers to buy seeds at an exorbitant price each year. As Esther Brett, a farmer from Eldoret, a city in Kenya, remarks, "It seems that farmers in America can only make a living from GM crops if they have big farms covering hundreds of hectares and lots of machinery, but we can feed hundreds of families off the same area using our own seedling techniques and many different crops. Our model is clearly more efficient and productive."
Eerily similar to Grapes of Wrath, if you ask me. Now, Steinbeck's novel isn't all about the jarring criticism of the intercalary chapters. The Joad story is another reason why The Grapes of Wrath is a highly acclaimed literary classic. The Joads are an unflappable bunch, showing true grit throughout all those hardships I described before. This is relevant to anyone in any age, as we all know the story of someone who left everything behind to build a better life for themselves and their family. The tenacious nature of the Joad clan allows them to preserve their dignity, even in the face of being called derogatory terms such as Okies. They, like many other migrants, are apprehensive about taking charity at a government camp and are relieved to hear that they must work to receive benefits. This may stem from Steinbeck's own life experiences during the Great Depression, where, to his dismay, he and his wife were forced to live off welfare checks for some period of time. It was his wrath and anger at being poor that helped him break out of the cycle of poverty, and he suggests that it's the same with the migrants. Their wrath is beneficial because it helps them remain dignified. Though the migrant men are fearful about being unable to find a job to feed their families,
the fear went from their faces and anger took its place, and the women sighed with relief, for they knew it was all right. The break had not come, and the break would never come as long as fear could turn to wrath.
There's no doubt that the Joads lean on each other for support. They always stay together, and it's this familial bond that helps them through their plight. This thematic idea is embodied symbolically by the only nameless character of the novel, the backbone of the Joad family, and arguably the strongest character within the book, Ma Joad. Ma Joad is a strong-willed matriarch, which is a deviation from the stereotype of a docile woman of the 1930s that enthralls readers even further. Though Ma Joad has the archetypal nurturing and caring traits of a mother, she is willing to go to any lengths to keep the family together. When her husband suggests breaking the family apart temporarily to get their car fixed and threatens to push her around when she doesn't listen, she says,
"But you just get a stick now and you ain't licking no woman. You're a fightin' 'cause I got a stick all laid out too."
Steinbeck also uses the teachings of yet another character to convey the idea that it is love that binds us all. That brings us to our character spotlight. Today, we'll examine the role of Reverend Casey within The Grapes of Wrath. Though Casey isn't seen very often in the novel, his impact on the way characters think is quite profound.
Casey is a walking, talking biblical illusion, and it's because of him that Grapes of Wrath becomes a sort of gospel. In the novel, he believes that love is the Holy Spirit, rather than some sort of deity. He once says, I figured about the Holy Spirit and the Jesus road. Why we gotta hang it on to God or Jesus? Maybe it's all men and women we love. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit, the human spirit, the whole shebang.
In the novel, Casey is a Jesus Christ-like character who shares his beliefs while roaming around with the Jodes. However, just like Christ, he is persecuted for his sermons. He's thrown in jail and considered a communist. He still leaves a deep imprint on Tom and the rest of the Jode family, who are interested in looking out for all the migrants they meet. This is why Tom makes his now famous pledge:
There's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Whenever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
In short, Grapes of Wrath is Steinbeck's masterpiece that functions as a criticism of capitalism, advocacy for love and companionship, a gospel, and a tale about those who face adversity when building a new life.